I'm a 17-year-old guy currently living in Phoenix, Arizona. This incident took place around 6 months ago on an overnight trip into the Superstition Mountains, which are about an hour drive east of Phoenix. I'm not going to specify the exact trail because I've been doing this stuff long enough to realize what happens when you post stuff on the internet. Whether it's a good trail, abandoned mine, ghosts, or whatever it may be, people come flocking, and usually with a lot of trash and loud music. Anyway, this particular trail I was taking was an 8-mile loop through a canyon. Pretty simple in and out overnight trip. I planned to go with my friend, but at the last minute he had to cancel, and I was left on my own. So, with a packed bag and a car ready to go, I decided to go on my own. Not leaving the house on time, and some trouble navigating rough forest roads, I didn't arrive to the trailhead until around 5:45, which for those of you who don't backpack, this is a very big no-no. I had about a 4-mile hike until I arrived at my planned camping spot, and it was getting dark fast, so I figured if I moved quick enough, I could get at least 2 to 3 miles in before I had to find a spot. This strategy left me hiking a very dark trail on my own, with about 15 miles of dirt road between me and everyone else. Hiking in the dark by itself is scary, especially for where I was and being on my own. Eventually, it got so dark that I could only see where my headlamp was pointing, and that's when I figured I needed to stop and get a camp set up. With only using the headlamp as my light source and trying to move fast, I ended up in a less than ideal spot, but there were some burnt pieces of wood and the remains of a fire circle, so it looked like people had been there before, but definitely not recently. My first priority was to get a fire going. I scanned the area around me and was able to find some dry wood, and I got the fire going. I got my tarp set up and cracked open a can of chili mac I'd brought for myself and was very much looking forward to eating. I was feeling good. My camp was set up and my food was on the fire. The feeling of uneasiness from the hike in had almost gone away, but it was still there. I guess a side effect of camping alone in a remote area. To fully understand what happened, I have to explain to you how my camp was set up. The site I'd picked was a small clearing surrounded by large pine trees, with the trail about 30 feet to my left. When you're in the woods and have a fire going, the fire casts a circle of light around it, and everything on the edge of that circle and past it are pitch black. I was sitting on the ground near my fire, eating my dinner, when a small rock about the size of a marble was thrown into my camp. I looked at the tiny rock in shock, as I was positive that I was the only person on this trail that night. I immediately turned my light on and towards the area where I'd seen the rock come from, but due to the density of the pine trees and brush, I could only see about 10 feet. I spent the next 15 minutes in disbelief as I scanned the tree line that surrounded me, searching for what or whoever had thrown that rock, not daring to stray too far from my fire that in hindsight offered me a false sense of security. After sitting back down and spending the rest of my time on high alert, I was able to convince myself that I'd somehow kicked the rock, or it had fallen from a tree. I went to sleep that night, not expecting the pure terror that was about to unfold. I woke to the sound of rustling leaves, barely audible if you weren't listening for them, but they were there. Still in a sleepy daze, I listened as the rustling of leaves got harder to hear, as I assumed they were moving away from me. I went to grab my handheld flashlight that I'd left next to me when I'd fallen asleep, but the more I looked, the more scared I got as I came to realize that it was no longer there. I stood up in my sleeping bag and ducked out of my tarp and looked around. I was able to see a light off in the woods. It couldn't have been more than 15 feet away. It was my flashlight, laying on the ground in a pile of leaves. This is one of the few moments in my life where I have almost shit my pants. The flashlight that I'd left sitting right next to me when I'd fallen asleep a few hours ago was now 15 feet away from me, past the tree line in the woods. I hurriedly slipped my boots on, clutching my knife in the other hand, and keeping my head on a swivel. I weighed my options: stay here and wait out the night, or attempt the 3-mile hike back to the car in the dark. I figured that whatever or whoever was out there with me was definitely going to have a better advantage if I was out on the trail without light. So I decided to stay at the camp and wait out the night there. Eventually, it came back. I could hear it, walking through the woods. It was far off, but I could hear it. It sounded like someone leisurely walking by, like they were on a stroll without a care in the world. Sometimes it would walk too far away, and I would lose the sound of its steps. But then, an hour later, maybe 2, it would return, still faint as ever. This went on for about 3 or 4 hours, until I listened to the steps get closer and closer, until they were about 7 feet from me. At this point, the fire had gotten very small, as I'd run out of wood from my pile. The footsteps stopped, and everything went totally silent. I sat there still for 2 hours, clutching a knife in my hand, and prayed that I wouldn't hear anything else. I stayed like that until the sun cast enough light that I could see that I was alone in my campsite. I packed my things and sped-walked the 3 miles back down the trail I'd taken. I arrived at the empty dirt road where my car was parked and nearly sprinted to it as I unlocked my Subaru and jumped in and drove, and I didn't stop until I put at least 20 miles between me and that place. I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction to buy a Red Bull, but mostly just to see or talk to another person. As I exited the store, I was able to read what was written in the dust on the back window of my car. "Sleep well," it said. A lot of weird things have happened to me on my various adventures through Arizona, but this is the weirdest and scariest by far, so I thought I'd share it. There is a seriously deranged person living in Superstition Mountains. Do yourself a favor and stay as far away from those mountains as you can. So this happened last year in Virginia, and is also the reason I never backpack alone anymore. I was taking summer courses at the time, and we ended up with a 3-day weekend in June, so I thought it was a great time to go explore some of the Virginia wilderness. I did a Google search and found a state park with a trail that looked nice, and let my roommate and family know the trail I was going to be on. When I got close to the park area, I saw a little outdoor shop where people hiking the Appalachian Trail stop. I went in to grab a map of the area just in case I got lost. As I was talking to the owner, he mentioned a trail that's not well known that has a pretty cool waterfall and swimming hole. This piqued my interest, so I had him show me on the map. It took me outside the state park, but he said it was a great place to go. I paid for the map and thanked the owner. I texted my roommate and parents about the new trail, and I parked my car and set off on my adventure. I should note that the waterfall was going to be a side trip from my journey. I was planning 3 days, 2 nights. I started on a part of the Appalachian Trail, and it was pretty packed with people, and some of them were really fun to talk to. As expected, as I got further and further from the main trails, I saw less and less people. Around early afternoon, 3 miles from my destination, I noticed it was unnaturally silent. There were no birds, no bugs, not even wind, and I had a feeling of being watched. I shook it off as me overanalyzing the situation. I got to the waterfall, and it wasn't too spectacular, but it was cool to look at. Plus it had a good-sized area to swim in, so naturally I stripped down to my skivvies and took a dip. It was pretty refreshing. As I was getting my clothes back on, I started whistling to myself. It was a chill bill because it was stuck in my head. That's when I heard something whistle the same tune back. I thought it was a bird copying me, so I went back and forth with it, and it'll repeat whatever I whistled. I thought it was pretty neat. As I was setting up camp, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched again. Like I'd get goosebumps and my hairs would stand up. As night fell, I built a small fire and lit my jet boil to make dinner. As I did this, I became hyper-aware that again, there was no sound, just deafening silence. Some part of my brain was telling me that I'm not safe, and to get out of there. I ignored it and crawled into my tent with my flashlight and book. I went to sleep without incident. When I woke up the next morning, my site was trashed. My camp stool was nowhere to be found. My bear bag with my food was cut down, and the contents were thrown across the site. My first thought was a crafty animal chewed through the rope and got at the bag, but I looked at the rope, and it was cut with something very sharp. Plus, none of the food was even touched. I also noticed bare footprints all around my campsite. Keep in mind, I'm at least 6 to 8 miles from a road. As I was looking at the mess, I heard a branch snap off in the distance. I turned to look in that direction. I saw nothing, but I heard that whistling again. My whistle from yesterday, but it was different. It sounded more sinister. It made my hair stand on end, and this is when I listened to my instincts to get the hell out of there. It sounded like it was a little off in the distance, so I packed up my camp as fast as I could. The whistling got closer as I finished stuffing the tent into my bag. I didn't bother with putting anything away properly. The whistling was incessant and sounded like it was coming from all directions. I got fed up with the whistling. I stood up and I yelled into the woods, "Shut up," and "What the fuck do you want?" It stopped whistling and it was quiet for a moment. Then it repeated what I said in my voice. It sounded just like me, but distorted like it came from an old TV. After I heard this, I immediately threw my pack on and ran the direction I came. I heard it moving just behind me, fast switching between the whistle and my voice. It felt like it was toying with me, not coming too close, but not being too far. Eventually it sounded like it got further and further away from me. Then it stopped suddenly. When it stopped, I stopped and turned around. I wished I didn't, because I heard the most bone-chilling screech ever coming from right next to me. That's when I started running again. I didn't look, I only ran. Less than half a mile, I ran into a couple that was also backpacking. They saw the look of terror in my face and asked if that was me that screamed, and they asked me if I was okay. I told them about what happened, and they decided to not go down where I just came from. We moved to a more populated trail as quickly as we could. As soon as I got back in my car, I drove to one of the park ranger stations and reported what happened. Since the site was off park grounds, they told me it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but they'll send a ranger to investigate. The ranger station's parking lot run right up to the woods, and when I was getting into my Jeep, I heard the Chill Bill tune coming from the woods just in front of me. I have never driven so fast in my life. When I told my roommate why I was back after only one night, all he said was, "Bro, I'm never going camping with you." This happened about 4 years ago. For a bit of backstory, I'm from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city, which if you drove about an hour in any direction, would either lead to another city or beautiful nature. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend to see some of this beautiful nature, and decided on a national park about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no sort of secret location. It's very well known, but there are a ton of different areas to it, all with different rural and windy roads taking you to the various areas of the park. We'd gone in 2 different cars, my friends in one, and my girlfriend and I in another to have some time together. We finished out the day of hiking, and we were heading home down one of the less common roads. I remember seeing this really beat-up old 70s sedan with a wild-looking guy in the driver's seat drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't uncommon, as there are a lot of smaller, less economically sound towns spattered around the area. But for some reason, him and his car stood out, and my girlfriend noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the windy road, there was a pull-off area. Just a semicircle of gravel you could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out colorful vans to backpackers parked there, with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she sees us, she jumps out onto the road and flags us down. Now, I've read enough of these subs to know pulling in to help her on a quiet road might not be the safest idea, but back then I hadn't, and my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily, she wasn't the person I didn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and scared when we pulled in. I told my girlfriend to wait in the car, and I got out to speak to her. She was almost in tears. I can't remember where she was from, but it was a Central European country from memory, touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. She told me her van had broken down, and she pulled off there, then called the van company's assistance line, and was waiting for help. By this time, my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. Apparently, a scary man had driven past her a few times already, first time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She'd thanked him and said no, and that she was waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left, but then kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes in opposite directions, slowing down and looking at them, then driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle, because the guy terrified her and her daughter. I agreed. My friends, being the awesome people they are, decided my girlfriend and I were enough, and they ditched us. Thanks, guys. We stayed with the woman for a little while, before the car my girlfriend and I had seen earlier drove past kinda slowly, coming the opposite way we'd seen him the first time. As soon as he'd driven around the bend, the lady told us that was the scary man that she'd been seeing before we got there. This got my girlfriend and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we got from this guy, just seeing him on the road. A few minutes later, he came back from the other direction, and he pulled into the parking area. For a bit more context, I'm not an intimidating man. I'm tallish, but I have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features, so there's not at all intimidating me. A terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, my girlfriend, who doesn't look that intimidating but is tough as nails, parked off a quiet road in a rural location, with a not-so-nice-looking guy pulling in to where we were. Great. He gets out and is redneck as hell, and definitely not friendly-looking. No judgment on the redneck part. I come from a poor country town north of our city, and those are my people, but hopefully that sets a picture. He strolls over to us. At this point, I walk towards him to put myself between the girls and him. I have no idea where this bravery came from. I would definitely not describe myself as a brave person normally. He looks at the girls, then me, and asks if he can help. I tell him no. We're just waiting for the assistance vehicle. Then say we've got it covered. He then says maybe he could stay and wait with the woman and her daughter so that we don't have to. I tell him we're happy to stay and thank him, but again, we've got it covered. He kind of just stood there for a while, staring at all of us, not really saying anything, giving off really creepy vibes. After what seemed like forever, Another car drove past us and looked out, but kept going. This seemed to startle him. He mumbled good luck and got in his car and drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes. We ended up talking a lot, and hopefully we have made her opinions of Australians a bit brighter after the mega creep. Finally, the assistance vehicle arrived. A bigger guy who could definitely handle himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff to be safe, but he was in a car marked by the company. He had all the tools and definitely seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time. It made me feel good that even if this guy was just a weird-looking, awkward country guy that didn't mean any harm and was really just trying to help, we had still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. I don't think he was, and definitely believe he was up to no good. But you never know. I did get a message from her to say she was safe, so everything ended well. But, creepy mountain guy, let's not meet again. I'm in my late 60s now. This happened many years ago. I'd worked for most of my life as a forest surveyor, the kind of job that keeps you deep in the backcountry, hiking remote timberlands with a clipboard, compass, and silence for company. Over time, I developed a private obsession, finding lost towns, not the ones on the tourist maps, the real ones, the settlements that had disappeared so completely. It was like they'd been swallowed whole by the land. Sometime in the late 90s, I came across a strange reference in a 1910s freight ledger from a regional rail line. It listed a handful of grain shipments going out from a station I didn't recognize. Just a name and a code. I double-checked maps, county records, even property archives. Nothing. It wasn't a station anyone had heard of, not a town listed in any history book. It was just a shadow in a ledger, last active in 1924. I tried twice to find it on my own, failed both times. By then, the forests had reclaimed everything. Old logging roads were gone. The rail spur that had once connected the area was reduced to a patch of rusted nails and earth decompressions in the moss. On my third attempt, I brought my great-nephew. He was 13, sharp, grounded, respectful. I thought it might be good for him to spend a few days disconnected from the world, and I wouldn't mind help hauling gear. We hiked in over 2 days. The last trail we followed was barely that, more suggestion than path. But late on the second day, we found it. A shallow valley with 5 weathered buildings, 3 homes, a narrow wooden structure that might have been a school or chapel, and a single-room trading post. There were no roads, no recent signs of life. It was too remote, too well hidden. Everything was still. One of the homes looked like it had been left in a hurry. Furniture in place, a coat hanging by the door. Upstairs, a suitcase packed and left open on the bed. In the kitchen, a chair pushed back from the table. A plate and fork coated in a fine layer of dust and mold. It felt interrupted, like someone had stood up in the middle of dinner and never came back. The store had a few cans left on the shelves, faded boxes of soap, a jar of candy that had turned into powder, hand-painted signs for rope and dried goods. My nephew pointed out that there was no cash box, no ledger, no safe, nothing of value, just the shell and the quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the usual forest sounds. I didn't notice at first. It was him who said it. Why is it so quiet? We stood there, listening, and it was like the world had stopped outside the valley. Then we found the letter. It had slipped behind a cabinet in the store, sealed in a brittle envelope. I opened it, dated May 1924. The handwriting was shaky but legible. The writer, someone named Walter, mentioned the loss of the elevator, no trains for weeks, and we can't stay any longer, not after what's happened. There was one more line scribbled sideways along the bottom margin. They started acting strange when the last train came. We should have left sooner. That night, we camped near the edge of the clearing. My nephew didn't sleep. Said he kept hearing footsteps in the woods. I told him it was just branches cracking, maybe a deer. But I didn't sleep either. At one point, I stepped away from the fire to relieve myself. The moon was out, full and white. From the edge of the tree line, I could see all 5 buildings clearly. And for a split second, just a blink, I could have sworn there was someone standing in the doorway of the farthest house. A tall, still figure, like a shadow that hadn't moved with the wind. When I blinked again, it was gone. I didn't mention it to the boy. We left first thing the next morning. We tried to go back a year later, same trailhead, same direction. Nothing. The clearing was gone, or covered, or had never been where we thought. Logging companies had moved through, and everything had shifted. We spent 3 days searching. We never found it again. I still have the photos from that first trip, but they're off, blurry, foggy, distorted like they were taken through old glass. You can tell there are buildings, but they look warped somehow, as if the place didn't want to be captured properly. I've looked for more references in the years since. The name from the ledger doesn't show up in any official state record. It's not in the National Archives. That stretch of rail was torn up in the 30s, and the company went bankrupt by 41. It's like that place, and whatever happened there was scrubbed clean. My nephew still remembers it. We talked about it a few months ago. He said, "I don't think we were supposed to find it." And I think he's right. Some towns die, some are erased, but some, just a few, are left behind on purpose. I'm a 14-year-old male, and my friend group, all around the same age, all love one thing: sailing. So in the event of a boat race in a lake in Italy, where we all come from, we decided to participate. Since the race was hosted on a lake, there was a lot of green and camps nearby. My friend suggested we spend the nights there camping. We brought our tents and sleeping mats, and we found the perfect spot. It was kind of isolated, but it had a beautiful view of the lake. One small issue, though. The camp was more like an open space in a little forest, so we were surrounded by trees, with the only way to get in and out being a narrow dirt road. We parked the camper there, and us teens prepared for the sleep outside. All the adults slept in the camper. We had a shit ton of fun, joking, starting a fire. You know, all the things you do on a camping trip. When it was time to sleep, we all got into our tents and drifted off into sleep. Well, I hope so for my friends, but that wasn't the case for me. I just couldn't sleep, probably due to the uncountable number of sodas I downed just a few hours prior. As I stared at the roof of the tent, I started to have the feeling that we weren't alone there, that there was something, or even worse, someone there with us. I didn't think much of it and tried to sleep until I heard the loud sound of a tree branch breaking. I wasn't the only one to hear it. My friend, who was in the tent with me, suddenly woke up and whispered, "What was that?" I told him that it was probably an animal wandering around, and accidentally broke a tree branch on the ground, as it probably would often occur in forests like that. As I kept explaining, my friend signaled to me to be quiet and to listen. There were footsteps. That's what ran through my mind as soon as I heard leaves and branches moving on the ground. What happened next, though, is scary. Everyone was suddenly woken up by the camper's anti-theft alarm going off. We all peeked out of our tents just to see a silhouette of a man running away in the woods. We found a crowbar near the camper's front right door. Thankfully, the alarm went off and scared the thief, because if it didn't happen, most likely all of our belongings that were inside the camper would have been stolen. I live in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. It's a beautiful area with hundreds of miles of national forest, some great state parks, and a ton of fantastic camping places. Unfortunately, my hometown is also relatively poor. While there are some out-of-town residents from Atlanta and other places, a lot of people where I live are really poor. I do freelance work as a technical writer, so I can do most of my work online. If I didn't have that going for me, I'd have to move somewhere else. It's just one of those small towns that will rob you of your ability to accomplish anything in life if you stay there too long. Excluding a handful of doctors and lawyers and Georgia Power Company employees, the only employment in the area is at Walmart, fast food, and a couple of grocery stores. To the east of my town, there's a massive national forest. It's loaded with great campsites and lots of relatively unused hiking trails. I really enjoy hiking on them with my dog, but it can be a bit of an unnerving experience sometimes. It's about a 10-mile drive from town, and there's no cell phone service or homes for miles. In the past, there have been a lot of vehicle break-ins at the trailheads. The gravel parking lots at some of them glitter with bits of broken glass from what I'm guessing were car windows. Sometimes there are really shitty people hanging around these trailheads or just driving around on the Forest Service roads. These are really rough roads, and you'll see these beat-up $500 cars just barreling along the roads meant for a 4x4. Some of the people you see in the cars look like the guy that got crushed by an ATM in Breaking Bad. All that being said, it's still a great place to camp. However, you just have to be careful. A few years ago, 2 of my friends and I decided to go play paintball in the national forest. Probably not legal, I know. We decided to turn the paintball expedition into a camping trip so we could play the next morning too. After a pretty uneventful day of shooting paintballs at each other, we drive a couple of miles to one of the more popular camping spots. Unfortunately, a church group or something had taken up all the spots in the area. This was really the only camping spot that we were familiar with, and it was getting pretty late. We decide to keep on looking, so we drive for about an hour further and further into the woods. By this time, it's getting a bit dark, and we're getting a bit worried about finding a spot. We all had GPS on our smartphones, but none of us had any service. We turn off onto an unfamiliar road that isn't in very good shape. In fact, it looks like the Forest Service rangers used a backhoe to block off the road with a mound of dirt. A broken metal barrier lay in the woods nearby. That said, it looked like 4x4 vehicles had been going over the mound, so it was pretty worn down. Our F-150 had pretty high clearance, so we decided to go over the mound. There was an old gravel road on the other side, and the road was pretty much clear of debris. We drove a few miles down this road and came across an opening next to a small creek. There were some blue tarps hanging over a plywood table nailed to a tree, which seemed kind of odd. That said, it was pretty much dark at this point, and we didn't want to keep driving around all night looking for a camping spot. We left the truck light running, and we set up the tent. As we were setting up the tent, I started to notice that there was a lot of trash in the woods surrounding the site. I see a green bottle laying on the ground. I take a look at the label and see that it's a bottle of home and garden insecticide. I was really tired at the time, and I just thought that someone had been dumping their home garbage out here. None of us thought it was weird that someone would be dumping garbage in an area that's more than an hour from the nearest home. We set up camp, had some beers, and made chili from scratch. By this time, it was probably around 11 p.m. As we're eating, we notice a faint glow from the other side of a nearby hill. At first, we thought it was moonlight filtering its way through the trees. However, the angles didn't make sense. It didn't seem to be a bright light, and it wasn't moving. It was kind of like that glow you see over a bright city. We couldn't see the light source itself, though. Since there were no other access roads in the area, we decided it wasn't other campers. The hill was about a quarter-mile from our campsite, so we decided to go investigate. Under normal circumstances, I know I wouldn't have done so. However, we all had a few rum and cokes in our stomachs, and two of us, Jacob and I, decided to take a look. My other friend, Isaac, decides to stay behind to pop some popcorn over the fire. We start walking towards the light source, and the situation gets even stranger. All the trees in the area have their bark knocked off in a circle around their trunks. We thought it could have been the work of a beaver that lived in the creek, but it seemed strange that a beaver would go around all these trees and just knock the bark off in a circle. Jacob and I started talking about the ghost beaver in pretty loud voices, probably due to our drunkenness. As we're almost to the top of the hill, Jacob tripped and yelled, "Oh shit." A few seconds after he yelled, the light, whatever it was, went out. We looked at each other and decided that maybe we don't need to see what that light was after all. We walked back in silence and kept looking back every few seconds. We decided to turn off our flashlight and just use the moonlight to get back to the campsite. When we get a couple of 100 feet from the campsite, I can see my other friend Isaac walking around the campsite. He was wearing a hooded coat that I hadn't seen him wearing before. For some reason, he's carrying his paintball gun around in his hand. That seemed a little odd, we said to each other. The fire had started to die down, so we couldn't see our campsite very well. At this point, we'd probably been gone for almost an hour. From the distance, it looked like Isaac was looking for something. He kept walking around the site and was peering in the tent. When we were almost back to the campsite, we saw Isaac walk up the road we came in on. We figured that he was going to use the bathroom and didn't want to wander through the woods like us. When we got back, we sat next to the fire and waited for Isaac to come back. All of a sudden, we see him lurch out of the tent. He stumbles a few feet and vomits. After we left, he had a few more rum and cokes, he mumbles. We ask him why he kept wandering around the campsite with the paintball gun, and he gets a strange look on his face. They're locked up in the cabin of the truck. Did you unlock it? We go and check the truck, enter the door code, and see all of our paintball equipment just as we left it before. The keys to the truck were still hidden in a magnet fob underneath. I get a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Isaac, what were you doing after we left? I ask. I was watching a movie on my phone. Then I fell asleep, I guess, he responded. But you were walking around with a paintball gun, right? Did you just change jackets? Isaac said that he'd been in the tent since we left and that he'd been wearing the same unhooded fleece all night. Someone had been walking around our campsite, and it wasn't Isaac. At this point, all of us are way too drunk to drive, but we decide to go ahead and pack up and go back to my house for the night. We don't bother packing up the tent. We just fold it down with the sleeping bags and everything in it. We jump in the F-150, and I start to drive out. When we get to the dirt hump, we see something gray blocking our path. The metal barrier that had been lying in the woods earlier is now back on its stand, right on top of the hump earlier. By this point, all of us have sobered up to the situation. No one wants to get out of the car to try and move the barrier. I had a metal guard on the front of the F-150, so I drive forward slowly, tapping the metal barrier with the front of my truck. It falls right off, and we drive over it slowly. We were terrified that it would pop one of the truck's tires as we drove over it, but luckily it didn't. As we drive down the road, we see a vehicle following us with its lights off. It's probably 1,000 feet behind us, but we keep catching glimpses of it as the moon reflects light off of it. I start to drive as fast as I can on the Forest Service road, and the other vehicle keeps pace. It doesn't get any closer though. It stays just 1 or 2 turns behind us. We can only see it when the road straightens out. After about 45 minutes of speeding along gravel roads, we make it back to the main paved road. I start to drive everyone back to my house, but I decide to go a different way just to be safe. I didn't get pulled over for a DUI, luckily. Camping can be fun, but very rural camping can be dangerous. I've driven past that metal barrier since that time, but it's always been in place. I would never go down that road again, though. So I've been sitting on this experience a while. I guess just not wanting to make a big deal out of nothing. But after reading some of the stories here and on other related subs, I would really like an answer to what I experienced. Back in about March of this year, I went camping with a friend, my boyfriend, and 3 dogs. My friend slept in his tent with his dog, and I slept in my tent with my 2 dogs and my boyfriend. My friend's tent was about 30 feet away from ours, and we were camping in the North Georgia mountains off an old Forest Service road. We were right next to a creek. For context, I'm an experienced backpacker, and I'm familiar with the usual nighttime sounds, like rustling in the leaves, sticks breaking, cicadas, that kind of thing. I have a lot of experience camping by myself, so it's rare that I get spooked out by anything other than other humans nearby, as I'm aware of the dangers of traveling solo as a woman. However, this particular night, I wake up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread that I've never felt before. I check my phone and it's about 3:30 a.m. to 4 a.m. I really had to use the bathroom, and I was debating on whether I wanted to try to put my hiking boots on and venture outside to go, or just try to hold it until daylight. I didn't want to wake up the dogs, because if they heard me putting on my boots, they'd likely want to go outside to go to the bathroom as well. I'm still in the tent. That's when I notice it. It's almost like a hum, but not in the pleasant way where it's a tune or anything like that. It's a low-pitched hum that was reverberating through the campsite/forest and also through my body. It had 2 tones. It started with a relatively higher pitch and would switch to the relatively lower pitch after a period of time. Then it would start over without a break in the sound at all. It wasn't soft either. It felt like it was covering the entire wooded area we were in. It didn't sound like an animal, a person, a machine, or anything that I've ever heard. At this point, I absolutely cannot hold off on a bathroom trip any longer. I put on my hiking boots and quietly tell the dogs to stay put. My boyfriend is still sleeping. I unzip the tent and go outside. The entire campsite was covered in this spooky-ass fog, but it felt like it was my vision that was foggy, not the actual air. I couldn't see a damn thing. The 2-tone humming then got louder. I do my business maybe 5 feet from my tent, and I quickly nope the hell back to my tent and bury myself into my sleeping bag with a sweatshirt over my head to try and drown out or at least ignore the humming. The dogs raise their heads and growl a few times throughout this experience, but that isn't unusual for them when camping. I never saw any figures or lights in the woods, but I also was not looking for them and was trying to ignore the entire experience. Does anyone know what this humming could have been? So, I'm a 26-year-old male, and I'd been planning on a camping trip with my wife and dad for a whole year. I wanted everything to be perfect, as we don't get away from town and dive deep into the woods as much as I'd like. This takes place in the very tree-dense Davy Crockett National Forest in East Texas. Earlier that day, my dad decided to go a little early and pick out a good spot for us to camp. To give a layout of where we camped, there were 2 dirt roads on either side of us and an overlook to the north of us. We camped in the middle, between the 2 roads. My wife and I met my dad down there at around 11 a.m. We set up camp and proceeded to enjoy the day until around dinner time, when we started to cook our meal for the evening. Right as we got done with dinner, we see this truck circling around our campsite. He went around us several times and finally pulled right up in our camp and got out of his truck. He then proceeded to tell us that this was his family's campsite and how the firewood that was laying around was his. Now, in this particular forest, campsites are first come, first serve, and my dad had been there since 9 a.m. He then asked if he could camp next to us, and of course being friendly, we said yes. We didn't know that when he said next to us, he meant directly on top of us. He backed his camper in so close to our tents and vehicles that he blocked my truck in. We weren't sure why he was doing this, being that there were so many other campsites available. But we just shrugged it off and tried to have a good time anyway. Not too long after that, we noticed a white Dodge dually circling around us. We had an off feeling from this truck because it went around several times, but we dismissed it because the area we were at was popular due to the overlook. After a long night of drinking and goofing off, we decided to go to bed. I was in a dead sleep when out of the woods I wake up to a blood-curdling scream. I jolt up and ask my wife, "What the fuck was that?" About 30 seconds later, we hear another scream off in the distance. At this point, I grab my gun and unzip the tent so we could see out. My dad had left a lantern burning so we could see a little ways into our campsite. At that moment, we see the white Dodge dually tearing down the road behind us. They continued down the road until they were out of sight. We heard them stop and get out of their truck, slamming the door and screaming. They then proceeded to get back into their truck and drive very slowly down the other road that was in front of our campsite. At this point, we were terrified, thinking they were coming to rob us, but they kept driving until they were out of sight. Then we heard them shooting. After the gunshots ended, they sped off. At this point, we thought that maybe they were just drunk and acting stupid, so we didn't call the cops. Not that we had signal anyway. We just tried to go back to sleep. The next day, we had to make a beer run for my dad. When we made it out of the camping area and hit the main highway, there were police everywhere. They had stopped 2 young boys. We assumed they were the ones who were being troublemakers the night before and continued on into town. When we got back to our campsite, the cops were leaving after talking to my dad. They told my dad that the guys in the white dually had gone into the younger guys' camp while they were hunting and were robbing them. The boys walked up on their camp being robbed, and the dually guys pulled guns on the young boys, proceeding to rob the young boys at gunpoint. We think if it hadn't been for the people that camped right on top of us, as strange as it was, they would have robbed us instead. They made our campsite look bigger than it actually was. The people in the white dually were never caught. So, people in the white Dodge dually, let's not meet, because you might end up with a bullet. If only Jolene hadn't worn that stupid mask, things might have ended differently. I might have called off the whole trip and saved everyone. It all started as I stood at my mailbox waiting like a little kid who had ordered a toy from a cereal box. The mailman usually came at 3 o'clock, never fail unless something had happened. I stood at my mailbox staring at my watch that said 3:10. So what was the holdup? Did he have a flat tire? Did a terrorist attack? Did a bear grab him when he was trying to deliver me my precious delivery? Just as I was about to turn and go back to the house, I saw the little yellow light flashing on top of a car coming my way and nearly jumped out of my skin. This was it. If it didn't come today, there was no way I'd have time to order another one before leaving for the camping trip. The car slowly pulled up to the mailbox and I said hello. Instead of putting the mail in the box, he handed me a few letters and looked away. My heart sank as he turned and faced the road. "Isn't there anything else for me?" I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. He turned and looked in the back seat. "Oh, wait, it looks like there's something I forgot," he said, reaching into the back and handing me a brown envelope with the address on it I'd been looking for. He smiled and waved as he drove off, leaving me holding my prize. This was going to be a good camping trip now. I nearly skipped back to the house, threw the other mail on the table without looking at it, before ripping open the package. There it was, my glorious book light. I'm an avid reader and an avid camper. It's always been a struggle to read during camping trips. I took along various battery-powered lamps and flashlights, but nothing seemed to work for me. Getting comfortable enough to really settle into my book was a challenge. When I saw this light advertised on Instagram, I instantly knew this was what I needed. It was a book light that wrapped around your neck with a light at each end that would shine on the book. There was no doubt it would be perfect, and I ordered one right away. Finally, I could finish packing for the camping trip. My friends and I love to go hiking and camping. With a huge state park so close, it was a no-brainer that we would be there as often as possible. Every time we decided to go, we would all meet up at the trailhead and hike to the site together. This time would be the exception. There were scheduling conflicts, and if we wanted to go at all, it wouldn't be at the same time. Dawn and Rose could barely get away for the weekend. They would have to catch up to us later at the campsite. At the last minute, even Jolene called and said she was running behind and might not make it until later. In retrospect, I should have seen it coming, seeing what the date we had set for our trip. But instead of canceling and choosing another time, I just shrugged it off as conflicting schedules and hefted my backpack, then started down the trail. Being by myself on this trail never really bothered me before. I hiked this trail many times and never had a problem. I decided to go early and get the camp set up so we could have maximum time together. My schedule had been cleared for the entire trip, and I was going to take full advantage. The sun had set until I started down the trail, and it would be dark by the time I got to our campsite. Hiking at night wasn't the best thing to do, even though I knew the trail. But aside from getting camp set up, I was also excited to use my new book light. It worked surprisingly well, lighting up the trail and made it much easier to use my walking stick for the most difficult parts of the trail. Taking it slow, going at my own pace, and enjoying as much scenery as I could was a luxury I was enjoying. Usually Dawn would lead the group and drive us hard until we got to camp. I wanted to get out my book and read as I walked, but I figured that would be tempting fate, and I had no desire to faceplant on the trail after discovering a tree route the hard way. As I walked, lost in thought, suddenly the forest became eerily silent. The birds stopped singing, squirrels stopped chattering, even crickets stopped chirping. It was so quiet, I could hear my own footsteps. It was very unsettling. I stopped and slowly turned around, using my light to search for anything unusual. After a full circle without seeing anything out of the ordinary, I tried to shake off the feeling and just keep going. It didn't take long for me to begin speeding up. Every step was somehow more desperate than the last, as if getting to my campsite would somehow protect me from whatever was out there, making the animals and creatures of the night afraid to make a sound. By the time I could see the clearing where we camped rising in the distance, I was power walking, nearly running. All of a sudden, the noises started back up again, as if someone had flipped a switch, or I had somehow stepped out of some invisible danger zone. I paused and turned back to see if there was any physical sign of what had happened, if there was some creature lurking behind me or something. But there was nothing, and nothing seemed to be even more unnerving. It wasn't until later, after everything was over, that I realized how stupid it was for me to travel this trail by myself, let alone in the dark. I guess it was a combination of things that made me do it. First of all, just the disappointment of everyone nearly canceling at the last minute. Secondly, was my surprise package that came on time, and just wanting to use this cool new light in any way I could. But the really big thing that did it for me was my stubbornness. I had decided I was going camping come hell or high water. I didn't realize it would be the former. It didn't even register that I was heading out alone on the trail at night on October 30th, the day before Halloween. It didn't take me long to get my tent set up, and I didn't bother with a fire. I just dove straight inside and zipped up the entrance, somehow believing that the thin layer of tent material would keep me safe from anything that went bump in the night. I lay there on the bare tent floor, breathing hard in sheer terror, wondering why I was so frightened. There hadn't been any tangible proof of anything following me. I had seen nothing. What had gotten me so worked up? This is what I told myself over and over, until my breathing slowed back to normal as I unpacked my backpack to settle in. Once I was secure in my sleeping bag, I finally dug out the book I'd brought along for the trip. It was a domestic thriller called Secrets, about a woman whose life was turned upside down. I turned on my light and began reading. It didn't take me long to become so engrossed in the story that the world around me disappeared. That was when the adrenaline crash from the fear grabbed my face and said, "You're going to sleep now." Sometime later, I woke and pulled my face out of the small puddle of drool that had soaked into my sleeping bag. I sat up, wiped my mouth, and stretched. To my great surprise, the book light was still on, and I hadn't broken it by laying on it. The darkness outside had given way to a dull gray. It must have been just before sunrise. Pulling myself out of the sleeping bag gave me an instant reminder of how cold autumn mornings can be in the forest. While pulling on my jacket, I froze. There was something or someone moving around just outside my tent. Zipping up my jacket quietly, I slid towards the zipper tent window in hopes of getting a closer look. My hands shook as I pulled the tab slowly, hoping to make as little noise as possible and sneak a peek at whatever was out there. My eyes slid up to the opening and peered out. All I could see through the slit was dim outlines of trees through the growing morning light. I scanned around as much as I could through my limited view when suddenly a pair of glowing eyes appeared in the window. I screamed and threw myself backward onto my sleeping bag, landing with a thump that took my breath away. The shadow of the creature moved from the window to the main tent flap. I lay there helpless as the zipper undid itself, and the hideous face of the monster poked itself inside. It roared so loud, I clamped my hands over my ears. My life flashed before my eyes as it slowly entered the tent, growling and snarling. Regret filled me. Why didn't I wait for my friends? But then they would die with me. Maybe it was better they were late. They would find my horribly mutilated and possibly eaten body. But they might survive if they ran away. As these thoughts chased each other around my brain, I noticed something. The creature was wearing a sparkly bracelet. Not only that, but it seemed to have a manicure. Now that I looked more closely, it was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants. I reached up and grabbed the creature's face, then ripped it off with all my might. Ouch, it said as the fur came loose. In a heartbeat, I was holding the creature's face in my hand, and Jolene stood there rubbing her eyes. "You think you could yank my ears off the next time?" she said. "Sure, after I'm done having a heart attack, you jerk," I said. She smiled, still rubbing her eyes. "Happy Halloween," she said. "Screw you," I said, throwing the mask at her and storming out of the tent. "Wait, you're not really mad, are you?" I heard her say from behind me as I tromped down the trail. I didn't bother to turn around or even slow down. "Where are you going?" she asked. The thought registered in my head, but I couldn't seem to answer the question. Where was I going? I was just stomping down the trail with no destination in mind. The sun was peeking over the horizon as I passed a clearing in the trees. Without thinking, I slowed to a stop and stood there, admiring the simple, elegant beauty of the sunrise. I heard and felt a presence beside me as I stared into the rising sun. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Jolene said. I turned to her and smiled. "I should throw you off this cliff," I said. She took a step back, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Sucks being afraid, doesn't it?" I said. "Yeah," she said, staying a healthy distance away from me. "I guess it does. You know what you should do with that mask?" I said. "I'm sure you have a few creative suggestions," she said carefully. I turned to her with a gleam in my eyes. "You should scare the hell out of Dawn and Rose." Her look slowly transformed from fear to confusion as the edge of her lip slid up into a grin. It was late afternoon when Dawn and Rose came huffing and puffing up the hill to the campsite. I'd started a campfire and made some lunch. There was also some coffee brewing on the fire. "Well, you two sure took your time," I said, poking at the fire and adding another piece of wood. "You're lucky we came at all," Dawn said. "I was going to call and cancel." "Like Jolene did," I said, trying my best to sound upset and disappointed. "Are you kidding me?" Rose said, dropping her backpack. "After we busted our butts to get up here." "Afraid so," I said. "That's great," Dawn said, pulling her cell phone out of her pocket. "You wait until I talk to her." I wasn't sure if Jolene had silenced her phone or not. Dawn's call could ruin the whole prank. My mind searched frantically for something to do. "Don't bother," I said. "I already tried calling her this morning. It went straight to voicemail." Dawn said, putting her phone back in her pocket. "She's probably snuggled up in bed, sleeping." "Well, at least you two made it," I said, pointing to the logs around the fire. "Take a load off." They looked at the log with disdain, but shrugged and sat. "I guess exhaustion will lower your standards regarding where you rest." We chit-chatted for a while, mostly about how upset we were with Jolene for skipping out on us. Then I helped them set up their tents. We had just finished when off in the distance we heard a roar and a scream. "What was that?" Dawn said, looking around, trying to determine what direction it had come from. "I don't know," I said, putting on an Oscar-level performance of looking frightened while trying not to smile. Jolene had outdone herself. She said she would look around for roaring sounds on her phone, but that was so loud. I didn't know her phone could get that loud. Light was just beginning to fade, making it even harder to see if there was anything coming out of the trees towards us. Rose was having a full panic attack. "What do we do? What do we do?" she asked. "Let's just go in our tents and hope whatever it is doesn't care about finding us," I replied. "We should leave," Rose said, her eyes darting all around, searching for danger. "I think so too," Dawn said. "If there's something out there, it could come after us." I tried to do a quick pivot to save the prank. "Where would we go?" I said. "Our cars are miles away. If that thing was after us, it would stalk us on the trail too, and we wouldn't have our tents made up to hide in." They looked at me with what looked like suspicion that turned into resignation. "I guess you're right," Dawn said. "We should just go in our tents and hope that thing goes away." "Are you kidding me?" Rose said. "Why not just wrap ourselves in our sleeping bags and serve ourselves up as burritos for that thing?" "Don't you think you're overreacting?" I said. "We don't even know what that was. Maybe it was some animal calling for a mate." "And what about the scream?" "It could have been someone that saw it and was scared," I said. Dawn watched our back and forth conversation. "Let's just go to our tents," she said. "No," Rose said. "I want to leave right now." "There's the trail," I said, pointing. "No one's stopping you." She looked from the trail to Dawn to me. I turned and went into my tent. A few minutes later, I heard another tent flap rustle, followed by a third. A smile crept across my face. This was going to be fun. I was so excited, I barely read any of my book. Within an hour, I heard something outside the tent, rustling through the campsite and knocking things over. "Here we go," I whispered. It was all I could do to stay in my tent when I heard Rose scream. There was no way I could watch Jolene chasing them around with that ridiculous mask on and not howl with laughter. I wanted to give the prank time for them to be scared before revealing our devious plan. Fits of laughter fought to escape me, but I held them in as I heard Dawn's screams join the fray. From the sound, they were all running around, destroying the campsite. Between the growls, running, knocking into things, and screams of terror, the whole cacophony of it was nearly impossible to sit through. Every inch of me was aching to jump out and yell, "Happy Halloween, we got you." After a few minutes, the noise died down. Everyone must have gotten tired. I was still waiting for the aha moment when I heard Dawn or Rose curse at Jolene. The mask wasn't that convincing once you calmed down and got a bit of a closer look at it. Any minute now. I leaned close to the wall of my tent, but all movement had stopped. It was like everyone had just laid down and took a nap. I couldn't take it any longer. I ripped open my tent and jumped out, yelling, "Surprise! Happy Hallow!" The rest of the world died on my tongue. The campsite wasn't in disarray. It was destroyed. Both Dawn and Rose's tents were flattened. As I stepped closer, I saw rips and gouges in their tents as well. As I looked around the campsite at the carnage, my first thought was, wow, Jolene really overdid it. But that thought didn't hold for long. The more I moved through the camp, the more I saw claw marks and huge footprints, something that Jolene couldn't do. All doubts ended when I came across Dawn. She lay in a pool of blood, and at first I thought it was a trick, that they had turned Jolene back against me, and now I was being pranked. However, that thought died a quick death when I saw Dawn's severed arm laying a few feet from her. Her eyes were wide open in shock. She looked at me with a blank stare of accusation and tried to whisper something, but I couldn't hear it. I leaned closer, and she whispered again, her final words haunting me. This couldn't be Jolene. It wasn't a trick or a prank. Something real had just invaded our camp and destroyed my friend. Fear gripped me as I looked around to see if this creature was lying in wait to kill me too. As I searched the rest of the camp, hoping moment by moment that this thing was gone, I also didn't find Rose. Eventually, I found a large pool of blood not far from her tent, but nobody was around. The trail of blood led from the pool off towards the woods, and I had no desire to follow it. The next thought that came to my panicked mind was, if this wasn't Jolene, then where was she? She purposely didn't tell me where she was hiding, so I wouldn't unintentionally give away her position by glancing at a certain spot. It was a smart plan, until she went missing, and I have no idea what's going on. My next thought was calling for help, but when I got out my phone, I found it was also dead. Even though I didn't want to, I went over to Dawn's now dead body and searched for her cell phone, but I found it in pieces. There would be no call for help. Despondency smothered me and pulled me to the ground. I sat in the middle of the campsite beside a pool of blood that used to be one of my friends, only a handful of feet away from the broken body that used to be another one of my friends, having no idea where my third friend was. I'd never been in such a desperate place in my life, not only physically, but mentally, and I hoped I would never be in such a place again. I had no idea what to do or where to go. The realization began to set in that I had lost 3 of my closest friends in the space of a day. Tears flowed down my cheeks as I sat there in the glowing darkness, with only the embers of the dying light to keep me company. Should I sit here and hope that help would stumble by in the form of another hiker, or even better, a park ranger? It was late October, and the trails weren't very well traveled once the weather turned cold. As I sat there, a gust of wind blew through, tearing at the few remaining leaves clinging to their branches. They began to fall as if the forest was crying with me, or for me. I wish I knew what the forest knew about this thing that had destroyed my friends and my life, about how I would get out of here alive, and most of all, about what had happened to Jolene. As much as I wanted to just sit there and mourn forever, I knew I couldn't. I knew I had to get up and go figure this out. How would I get out of here? How would I survive? Maybe my tent held the key. By some miracle, my tent was undamaged. I started digging through my backpack. There are always things in everyone's backpack that they have for emergencies that never happen. Usually, it's a snakebite kit, a length of rope, or band-aids that seldom, if ever, get used. But as I was digging, I came across some things that might be useful. There was a can of pepper spray and a small pocket knife. At this point, I was happy to have anything I could use as a weapon. They went in my pocket along with the rope. So now it was decision time. Do I pack up my stuff right now and leave, hiking down the trail in the dark, having no idea if this thing is still on the hunt? Or do I lay down and get some rest, wait for morning, and hope it doesn't know I'm here? Neither one was a great option. There was no way I could even consider burying Dawn. I didn't have a shovel, and I would need all my energy to hike back out of here if I hoped to survive. Thankfully, the decision was made for me. As I laid there, mind whirling from everything that had happened, I fell asleep. I woke hours later to a bright morning sun peeking through my open tent window. I yawned and stretched, thinking about what a beautiful morning it could be. when suddenly I remembered everything that had happened. That's when I heard the growling. It was just loud enough to get my attention. Fear gripped me as I tried to figure out what to do. My brain went into full useless mode as run out of the tent screaming rose to the top of possible options. The growling didn't seem to get any closer as I lay there awaiting my fate. Encouraged by the fact that I hadn't become the monster's breakfast yet, I got up to my knees and quietly looked out the window. What I saw disgusted and enraged me. There were 2 mountain lions having their breakfast. Normally, I wouldn't care about such a thing more than staying as far away as possible. But today, their breakfast was my friend's dead body. I did exactly what was at the top of my brain's list. Ran out of the tent, screaming. At first, I ran straight at them, hoping it would scare them off. They both just stopped and stared at me, as if I were some rude interloper interrupting them having morning tea. The next thing they did was turn and take a few steps towards me. As I stared at their blood-soaked faces, I realized I'd done the worst thing possible. I lowered my hands and started backing away, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. This seemed to encourage them to increase their pursuit. I was almost back to my tent, but it didn't seem like diving inside and hiding was an option now. They were aware of me and very interested in me, possibly as lunch. As my list of potential actions dwindled to wait for death, my hand brushed against my leg and I felt something in my pocket. It was the pepper spray. I pulled it out, having no idea if it even worked on cats, and aimed it at them. They didn't slow in the slightest. It looked like a stream of water sprayed out of the can and landed on the first cat's face. Its reaction was immediate. It let out a massive yowl and began clawing at its face. The second paused in confusion, watching its companion devolve into convulsions of pain. When it looked back at me, I had already sprayed its face, causing the same reaction. For a long moment, I was treated to the insanely comical sight of these 2 predators twirling in circles, trying to claw their own faces off. And then the impossible happened. They both decided breakfast wasn't worth the cost of admission and ran off. I looked down at this small, innocuous-looking spray can that had just saved my life. It was tempting to give it a kiss in celebration, but I didn't want to take any chance of getting any spray on me. Writhing in pain wasn't high on my list of things to do today. Having just escaped death, I decided on my plan of action. My backpack was packed in under a half hour, and I was on the trail. Having said my goodbyes to Dawn and what was left of Rose, a sharp pang of guilt stabbed me as I left the campsite. Dawn's last whispered words haunted me. Shouldn't have come. She was right, of course. If any of us had known what was about to happen, there was no way we should have been here. But that's the whole point of life, I guess. None of us know what's going to happen at any minute. As if I wasn't depressed enough as it was, that thought sent me into near panic as my eyes darted all around, searching for danger. Now it wasn't only the monster, but the mountain lions and any other creature whose home I had invaded. Right then, I knew I would never visit this place again. Even the woodland creatures were quiet out of respect for my fallen friends. Wait, how would they know? As if in answer, the monster stepped out onto the trail and stared down at me. It was massive. I'd never seen anything that tall. Not only was it tall, but its shoulders were a good 5 feet wide. It was covered in dark fur that had splotches of wet, dark stains down the front of it. My mind told me that was all that was left of Rose. It unleashed a deafening roar that made a small river flow down my pant leg. My mind was like a little dog chasing its tail, trying to figure out what to do. As I stood there, frozen to the spot, it took 2 steps and was right in front of me. When it reached for me, some basic survival mode kicked in, and I went to the last thing that had saved my life. I whipped out the pepper spray and emptied the can in the monster's face. It reared back and screamed so loud I had to hold my ears as I ran around it and sprinted down the trail. My heart was pumping adrenaline. My feet barely touched the ground. I'd never run so fast in my entire life. The trees were a blur as I wound back and forth along the trail. All I could think was, just get away, just get away. As hope soared that I might be able to do just that, I heard a noise coming from behind me. It was like a bulldozer with legs. I heard pounding and crashing, as if something was destroying whatever got in its way. I glanced back, and the monster was gaining on me. But it was flailing its arms around in front of me, as if to protect its eyes from whatever was there. That momentary distraction was just enough. My foot caught on a branch I wasn't looking for, and I went tumbling at full speed off the trail and into the brush. I hit a tree hard with my back. I was sure I heard a crack. It was all I could do to just stay conscious. I watched through bleary eyes as the monster ran past me on the trail. There was no way I could celebrate or even move. Running so fast for so long had taken its toll, and now having fallen and possibly injuring my back had just added to my immobility. It took me a few long moments to catch my breath. Once I did, I slowly moved body parts to make sure they still worked. I saved the worst for last. Trying to sit up caused pain to shoot down my back. That wasn't a good sign. It seemed like I would be here for a little bit, at least until I recovered enough to make another try for my car. I knew it was less than a mile away, but right now, I couldn't even think about getting up to walk, let alone run. I painfully pulled my backpack off and sat it beside me. Next, I tried to cover myself and my pack with the loose leaves that blanketed the ground. Within 10 minutes, I was satisfied that no one would be able to see me from the trail without looking very closely. There was a peephole I'd left open to keep an eye on the trail. The monster would be back eventually. There was no doubt about that. Once it realized I wasn't on the trail anymore, it would backtrack looking for me. Spraying it may have saved my life, but it also doomed me to be its enemy forever. It would search high and low to find me. I was as sure about that as anything. Even though it was mid-morning, the trees here were dense, and light had to filter through a lot of them to make it to the ground. Reaching into my pack, I pulled out my reading light, which was surprisingly still in one piece. I used it to check my wounds and found they were mostly cuts and scrapes. As my adrenaline crashed, I could feel myself being once again dragged into unconsciousness. My eyes drooped, then suddenly shot open as I heard something. The part of the trail I could see through my peephole was quite small. I leaned to the left a bit, trying to not make any sound. That's when I heard sniffing and saw the monster coming slowly back up the trail. It was on all fours, smelling the ground. One eye looked like it was swollen shut, and the other was bloodshot. It got to the point in the trail where I'd fallen. It stopped, then turned, and looked right at me. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. The monster stalked straight towards me, as if it could see me plain as day. I glanced down and realized, to my horror, that my reading light was still on. I panicked. If I turned it off, the monster would know I was there. If I left it on, it was a beacon leading it right to me. I gently pulled it from around my neck, trying to move as little as possible. Once I had it off me, I set it on top of my backpack, so it was at the same level as it had been around my neck. I slid it away from the pack. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the knife, then opened it. The monster was so close, I could smell the stench of death coming from its mouth. It got right up to the light and brushed the leaves away to see what this thing was. There was only one shot for me to survive. I swung the knife with all the strength I had left, stabbing it in the eye that wasn't swollen. It reared back and screamed in pain. I didn't wait around to see what was going to happen. Every ounce of energy I had went to running away from this homicidal monster. My back screamed at me, but I ignored it. The creature screamed again, this time in rage rather than pain. It tore off after me, but couldn't see me, so it ended up slamming into a tree 3 feet behind me. My legs kept pumping, driven by the sheer terror. As I glanced back, I saw the monster listening to me run away. It followed my sounds and ran after me again. I pivoted and ran up the side of the trail, just in time for it to miss me and fall face first on the trail. It wasn't far to the trailhead now. I knew it was getting close. There was a hard turn in the trail where I had to be careful of my footing. It was narrow, and there was a steep drop that ended in a river far below. I ran to where the turn was and suddenly stopped. The monster had gotten up and was listening for me again. It was a gamble, but I stood at the turn and jogged in place as though I was still running away. It listened, then launched itself toward me. As soon as it began to run, I quietly stepped around the corner and softly walked down the trail a few feet. If my gamble paid off, I would be home free. If it didn't, I'd be dead. Time slowed as the beast galloped towards the turn. I watched and waited until finally I saw the bloody fur of its face with the knife still sticking out. At that last moment, it seemed to sense me around the corner and tried to turn, but momentum had already carried it past me, and it had no chance of staying on the trail. I leaned over and watched as it fell helplessly over the edge and tumbled down to the water below, hitting its head on several trees as it went. It had just come to rest at the bottom when I took off running. The trailhead loomed in front of me, and I didn't want to take any chances of that thing recovering and catching me before I got to my car. I'd never seen a more beautiful sight than my beat-up Toyota Corolla. When I approached it, I paused yet again and looked around for who or what might be watching me. Hanging from my driver's side mirror was the mask Jolene had worn. I took it off the mirror and looked at it in shock and confusion. Inside was a note. There was a crash from the woods that told me the monster hadn't given up. I jumped in the car, threw the mask on the passenger seat, and broke every speeding law getting out of the park. Even once I was on the main road, I pushed the pedal down to make the car go as fast as it could. My speedometer needle was vibrating when I hit 80. It wasn't until I was close to home that I slowed down. I got out and went into my tiny house, bringing the mask. I collapsed on the couch as my back complained. I would have to schedule an appointment with my chiropractor. Once I was safely inside, I picked up the mask and pulled out the note. It read, "I'm sorry to leave without telling you. The girls were coming up the trail and I was about to jump out at them when I saw this monster following them through the woods. I couldn't warn them or you without the monster seeing. When they set up their tents, it was watching from the edge of the woods. I panicked and quietly left, while it was busy watching the camp. I hope you're alive to read this, and if so, you can someday forgive me. Signed, Jay. I lay the note beside me on the couch, and all I could think of as tears streamed down my cheeks were Dawn's final words to me. Shouldn't have come.